Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to Modernizing One Hybrid App at a Time. Today, we're going to talk all about the shifting landscape of mobile app development. Many of you have been with us on this journey for a while now with the Telerik platform and more recently TypeScript. And you've probably been creating a few hybrid mobile apps with Cordova and maybe Kendo UI or Ionic. Maybe you've dabbled in creating truly native apps with TypeScript. Well, in the next hour, you're going to hear from a variety of speakers as we show you how to modernize your hybrid apps, how to create engaging UI, how to make the most of new tooling options for TypeScript development, how to even share code between your website and native mobile apps. Before we go any further, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Rob Lauer, and I've had the privilege of meeting more than a few of you at conferences and events over the last few years. I do help manage the mobility wing of developer relations here at Progress. You can find me on Twitter at Rob Lauer, and you're free to pester me there as much as you please. I'll be your MC today as we navigate between all of our great speakers. In terms of logistics, we love your questions, and during the webinar, we'll be answering your questions live on Twitter. Just use the Ask Telerik hashtag as you see it here. Tag your questions on Twitter accordingly, and our fantastic stable of engineers and developer advocates will answer. Likewise, we'd love it if you followed us on Twitter. You can follow the Telerik Twitter account for more information on our UI tooling offerings, and the TypeScript handle will, of course, hook you up with the latest and greatest from TypeScript. So let's get rolling. Now, a lot has changed since 2014. Why do I say 2014? Well, that's actually the first year Telerik platform was introduced. Now, App Builder, then known as Icinium, has been around a little longer even, but since this time we've all been developing hybrid mobile apps. We're trying to create engaging mobile app experiences for our customers, and the most cost-effective way to do this to date has been hybrid. And since 2014, it's reassuring to know that some things really never change. Well, what in particular? Well, we want to reuse the web skills we've been honing for years. We don't want to learn Swift, Objective-C, or Java just to create a mobile experience. We love our web skills. We want the mobile apps we create to be able to access native device features. This is why we aren't creating mobile websites after all. And we want the apps we write to be cross-platform. We want one code base to support both iOS and Android devices. We want the frameworks we rely on, whether they be Angular, Vue, Kendo UI, to be trusted and open source. And of course, we want the tooling we're using to have a strong corporate backing. We don't want to throw money away at a fly-by-night company. And Progress has really been there to assist you with your hybrid app development. With App Builder and the rest of the Telerik platform, you've been using Cordova to create robust hybrid mobile apps. And before we continue, let's make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what a hybrid mobile app is. When you're cooking up a hybrid mobile app, you're using HTML for your markup. The same HTML you use to create websites, yes. You're also using JavaScript for your app's logic. And you use CSS to style your app. Sound like a website? Well, it kind of is. The app itself runs inside of what is called a web view on the device. The web view is kind of like a Chromeless browser window. So no forward or back buttons, just the web engine and canvas itself. Now, hybrid apps use Apache Cordova, otherwise known as PhoneGap, which acts as a bridge between these web technologies and your app container. This means you're using JavaScript with Cordova and plugins to access native device features, plus mobile frameworks like Kendo UI or Ionic to build your app. We've learned some lessons over the years, though. Hybrid really promised this idea of leveraging 100% of our web skills to create mobile apps. It also promised the ability to reach 100% of native device features, which sounds perfect. And hybrid can be great, it can do everything, but what is our final result? It's not perfect. Hybrid app development leads to compromises. We've all seen it. Whether it's janky performance or annoying web view differences, hybrid is slowly becoming obsolete. So we believe hybrid has the right ideas, but maybe just not the best implementation. Let me explain. So we've said some things never change, and this is true. These are all still 100% valid today. But there are lessons we have learned. We've learned that customers demand the best from mobile. Whether you're creating a consumer app or an internal app for your business, your customers want apps that look and feel like a native app. So why would you give them anything but? Along with native UI comes native performance. Instead of trying to squeak every millisecond out of a hybrid app, why not just make your app native? And what about support for the latest operating systems? They seem to be released at breakneck speed, from a developer's perspective at least. So we demand a framework that lets us take advantage of the latest APIs. And there's 11 billion jillion native components and JavaScript libraries that we want to use. Trust me, I counted them. CocoaPods and Android jars that we want to leverage in our apps. Why not be able to drop them in and reuse them? And enterprise support. When we are developing apps, we want to make sure that there is not only a company behind the framework, but a company with a strong track record of providing unparalleled support. And this is really where Progress and NativeScript come into play. Progress is the proud supporter of NativeScript, offering dedicated support options, curating this open source project, and providing tooling choices to help you develop your next great native mobile app. So let's again make sure we are all crystal clear on what NativeScript gives us. NativeScript does let you create truly native mobile apps using many of these same web technologies as hybrid. For example, instead of HTML, you use a very easy to understand XML syntax that provides a truly native user interface. You use JavaScript, yes, the same JavaScript you've been using for years. You use a subset of CSS, again, the same CSS you've been using for years. And the last ingredient is, of course, the NativeScript framework itself. NativeScript is a thin layer that allows your app code to be compiled at runtime and run at native speed on the devices. Now, NativeScript has its own set of plugins to extend your app, along with a set of UI tools we call NativeScript UI. You can also access the wealth of existing native libraries like CocoaPods on iOS, as well as existing JavaScript libraries you can find all over the web. So if I can overgeneralize the differences of hybrid versus native, let me start with hybrid. Hybrid lets you use your web skills to create mobile apps. You can quickly get your app to market because you're using those same web skills you've been using for years. There are potential downsides though, like questionable app performance, meaning stuttering animations or slow responses to user actions. You also have to rely on Cordova plugins to access native device features, which means when iOS 12 comes out, for instance, you'll have to wait for plugin developers to catch up. Now with NativeScript, the pros are also using those same web skills. Granted, it's not HTML, but a simple XML syntax for laying out your pages. But you do get that real native app performance. There aren't so many cons though. Since it is not 100% web, there may be a slight learning curve. In general, hybrid can be okay for certain scenarios, but with NativeScript again, any app that needs native UI, native performance, access to those native device APIs, ability to reuse native components, these are all good reasons to stick with NativeScript. So what we see from mobile app developers is a trend away from hybrid options like Cordova and PhoneGap and towards these new breed of native JavaScript frameworks like NativeScript. I've been saying you can use your web skills to develop native apps, and that's true with XML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now your XML elements are very easy to understand, like the root page element, labels, text fields, images, date pickers, very intuitive controls. The app logic is handled with JavaScript. We support plain vanilla JavaScript or TypeScript. We also fully support Angular and have a community-backed integration with the Vue framework. Now the cool thing about our Angular support is that it allows you to reuse a ton of your code between a mobile app and a mobile website, which we're going to spend some time talking about today. Finally, you style your UI elements with the same old CSS you already know. You can also use Sass or less if you prefer, and you could style your app and even create animations with familiar CSS animation commands. Now, a default requirement for mobile app frameworks today is that they are cross-platform. This is important because it means you write your app code once and it automatically runs on iOS and Android without any changes required. So instead of writing the same app twice, you're quite literally writing it just once. And when we talk about the individual platforms, it's important to remember that you can also leverage existing native components. At the risk of repeating myself here, CocoaPods for iOS and Android jars can be added to your NativeScript app. You can also integrate NativeScript within an existing native iOS or Android app. Now, this is a bit outside the scope of what we're talking about today, but a quick Google search is your friend here if you want to learn more. Now, not only do we get cross-platform apps, they are also completely compatible with the app stores. Whether you're creating an app for the public app store or for an enterprise app store, there's no difference in the APK or IPA files generated by NativeScript. Now, NativeScript also fares very well against its main competitors. We've got hybrid and we have multiple native options like NativeScript and React Native. Well, let's take a minute to look at some of our competitors and see how we stack up. So starting at the top, every framework here allows you to access native device features. The asterisk next to Cordova is because Cordova relies on plugins to access features, so it can lag behind other frameworks. NativeScript, on the other hand, gets a check plus because it provides access to 100% of the native device APIs all the time. This is especially useful for when, say, the next iOS comes out. You don't have to wait for plugins to be updated. With NativeScript, you can use those APIs on day one, unlike Xamarin and React Native. Now, all the frameworks except for Xamarin let you reuse your existing web-based skill set that's based on JavaScript. Likewise, all the frameworks except for Cordova provide you with native UI and native performance. As another differentiator, all the frameworks except React Native are considered write once, run anywhere. I put an asterisk next to Xamarin because this does apply to Xamarin Forms, so I will give them the benefit of the doubt here. And in terms of ease of onboarding, it's a tough call and very subjective, I'll admit, but I would say as of today, Cordova has a slight edge if you're coming from a web developer perspective, hence the asterisk next to NativeScript. Now, both are easy to use, but Cordova may be slightly easier today. I personally think Cordova and NativeScript have a leg up here over Xamarin and React Native, but this is just my opinion. So today, I really hope to address some of your questions throughout this webinar, and I'm going to start with an obvious one. How do I migrate a hybrid app to NativeScript? It's really the theme of the webinar, right? Many of us are not doing as much greenfield app development as we'd like. We're building onto existing apps or maintaining legacy ones. So what we want to know is, how can we take our existing apps and convert them to NativeScript? Well, let's take a look. The short answer is, if you are using Ionic with Angular as your hybrid mobile framework of choice, there is a resource available at hybridtonative.com that walks you through migrating your app to NativeScript. As much as we love Ionic, this is a great resource for those of you who would like to take your existing hybrid app and start the migration process. The longer answer has us break down our existing hybrid mobile apps into a few segments. We have our views, the HTML that drives the UI of our apps. We also have the business logic, the JavaScript that powers our views. And we have the styling, the CSS we use to make our apps look gorgeous. Let's quickly break these all down and see how they translate to NativeScript. So if I look at the example app layout on the right here, we can roughly translate that into HTML using the code we see. This should make basic sense to most of us here. We have a header tag with a styled h1 and an input. We also have an unordered list with some kind of template in here for repeated items. What happens when I want to migrate this UI to NativeScript? Well, the UI is surprisingly simple. We have a label which we can equate to our styled h1. We have a text field, which is our input. We also have a repeater control, which simply lets us bind an array to it and repeat an item template. You may also notice the stack layout tag. This is one of many options you have for laying out your UI elements in NativeScript. Stack layout is probably the simplest option, as it merely stacks items vertically or horizontally. So in this example, we can see how the label, text field, and repeater, they're all stacked on top of each other. There are plenty of other layout tags you can use, and the beauty of NativeScript is that these layouts can be nested, allowing you to create some very compelling UI with a relatively small amount of code. Now, at the risk of oversimplifying things, let's take a look at some business logic for this app. In this case, we have a hybrid app with a simple JavaScript function to add a new item to our list. Nothing fancy here, just plain vanilla JavaScript. How would we write this same function in NativeScript? Well, in this case, we could quite literally copy and paste that function in. That's the beauty of native script. If your code isn't directly manipulating the DOM, you can probably copy and paste it as is. Now, I don't mean to imply that you can copy and paste your business logic and have it just work every time. That's why I like to say that JavaScript in NativeScript just works with an asterisk. There are some things you need to keep in mind when migrating an existing app to NativeScript. Again, in NativeScript there is no concept of a web view. Therefore, there is no browser DOM to work with. You can't use jQuery, for instance. You can, however, use a myriad of existing JavaScript libraries. Think of popular libraries such as Underscore, Moment, or Lodash. Those all work out of the box. Speaking of out-of-the-box support, NativeScript does treat TypeScript as a first-class citizen. So if you don't want to write plain JavaScript, you can leverage the type safety of TypeScript. And again, we do support JavaScript frameworks like Angular and Vue, making your transition easier and allowing you to architect larger apps. Now, what about styling our hybrid app? Well, we're using CSS, of course. Now, how do we style a NativeScript app? Certainly, styling a native app has to be different from the web. Well, not so much actually. This is another example of literal copy and paste from hybrid to NativeScript. While hybrid does not support every CSS property, the subset that it does support handle almost every use case we've seen. Now again, allowing us to upgrade our apps to native remarkably easy. Now before I hand you off to our speakers, I did want to take a moment to address the full stack of mobile app development. In reality, there are few mobile apps that start and end with an open source framework like NativeScript. Now here at Progress, we are directly supporting the NativeScript framework, of course. So in terms of mobile app development, we have your back. With the rich tooling options that we'll talk about today, along with the open source CLI and our free premium UI suite, we feel as though a mature NativeScript framework is really the bedrock of cross-platform development. But there's also the backend to consider. And Progress recently acquired Kinvey, which is quite literally the leading mobile backend as a service provider out there. Kinvey provides a robust backend for your mobile app and offers features such as full HIPAA compliance, which is a humongous differentiator from its competitors. And when we talk about data integration, look no further than Progress's Data Direct offering. Data Direct allows you to securely connect to systems of record via the cloud and connect to virtually any data provider out there like Salesforce, Oracle, SQL Server, and more. And finally, we know that mobile for most customers doesn't start and end with a native mobile app. Many of us are creating experiences for the mobile web as well, which is where Kendo UI comes into play. Kendo UI is the industry leader for web UI, including over 70 widgets with support for jQuery, React, Vue, and Angular. Now at this point, you may be asking yourself who else is using NativeScript. Well, personally, I would want to make sure that there are legit companies out there betting on NativeScript before I bet on it myself. I'm a bit of a laggard that way, I guess, but also maybe realistic. I've got some logos for you. We are actively working with large companies like SAP, Southwest Airlines, Verizon, Blue Cross Blue Shield, among plenty of others. We're really bringing NativeScript to the enterprise to prove its value. All right, so far I've been talking a lot about NativeScript, but haven't really drawn the lines to the Telerik platform and to App Builder. The truth is you can certainly develop NativeScript apps with the Telerik platform today. However, my first speaker is here to show you the power of using some new free tooling options to make your native app development process even more efficient. With that, I'd like to welcome Jen Looper to the stage to talk all things tooling. Jen is a developer advocate here at Progress. You can find her on Twitter at Jen Looper. And as a reminder, during the webinar, if you have any questions, please use the Ask Telerik hashtag on Twitter to tag your questions. All right, Jen, please take it away.
Hi everyone, my name's Jen. I'm a developer advocate here at Progress. You can find me on Twitter at Jen Looper, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the really cool tooling that we've introduced for NativeScript developers. I'm going to start with the playground. I'm going to talk about the plugins marketplace, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about Sidekick, which I think a lot of you are already starting to use these tools, and we're always interested in your feedback, so please let us know what you think. So let's talk a little bit about the getting started experience with NativeScript. To get started, you're going to have to install your native SDKs, then you're going to install your NativeScript CLI, create a new NativeScript project, then you're going to configure your emulators, and then you're going to have to deploy to device. That's sort of the standard workflow for a native development. Well, with Playground, we're offering you a different alternative. The new NativeScript Playground, which you're going to find at play.nativescript.org, is a really cool way to write snippets and code samples in the browser and test them directly on your device using a couple of companion apps. Let's take a look at how it's done. So to start tinkering with NativeScript code, I can visit play.nativescript.org and just create a sample app. And I can go ahead and get a QR code and it'll scan in the companion apps that are installed on my phone. So then I can start making some changes, and you're going to see the speed with which this thing can live sync to your device. So I just make quick changes, and I can even make changes in the action bar, change the title of the app, this sort of thing. It's a great way to test, to do little experiments, to try different styles, and see how far you can customize your code within the Playground. You can also use the little drag and drop capability here to drag buttons. For example, a little button with nice angular syntax right onto your screen, and it'll appear in your companion app right away. So you can add a little alert in the TypeScript and that'll come through as well. All you have to do is save and watch your companion app refresh. It's a really terrific way to just try and test. You can also click share at the top and share your Playground with other people. That's really helpful. You can just copy it, and then people will be able to open it with the QR code in their companion app. And you can also, if you want to share it in a different way, you can download a zip of the code that you just scaffolded. Now, a new thing that you can start tinkering with on the Playground is our implementation of NativeScript plus Vue.js. I'm actually really excited about this community initiative that we're starting to see more and more people getting interested in. So it's the same system. You create, using a template, a sample of our Vue implementation, and then you can start making changes right within the Playground and visualizing them in the companion apps. So here you can make little changes in this nice Vue code here, which you can tell it's Vue because it's got the little kebab cases and some different types of data bindings, but it does look pretty familiar if you're a standard NativeScript developer. Make little changes in the label here, and you can also tinker with things like the CSS and sort of design your app on the fly here. Now, if you're interested in learning more about NativeScript Playground, take a look at this great article that Sebastian wrote on the NativeScript blogs about the Playground. You can also take a look at how people are using the Playground to give us new NativeScript snacks. So visit nativescriptsnacks.com and you can take a look at the code snippets, and some of these are actually built in Playground. So you can run these snippets right on your phone. And another thing people are doing is using snippets to explain problems that they might be having trouble with right on the forum. So it's a great way to share code. A picture's worth 1,000 words. May as well just do a little Playground snippet, and then that will just ease everyone's comprehension of the issue that you're having. So that's a little demo of the very cool NativeScript Playground, which you can find at play.nativescript.org. So now let's turn our attention to the NativeScript Marketplace. So this is a website that will allow you to sift through all of the plugins that you're going to find if you start digging on NPM. So if you search for NativeScript, you're going to find 642 packages tagged with the word NativeScript. What is the deal with that? How can we sift through these plugins? How can you figure out what to use? The problem with plugins is that it's really hard to know whether they work on iOS and Android. Do they work at all? Does it work with Angular? Is it going to work in the future? And how do I use it, the implementation of it? So we have developed a tool just for you. The NativeScript Marketplace, which you'll find at market.nativescript.org, offers the concept of verified plugins. And these plugins are unit tested. They support iOS and Android, they are documented, and they support both vanilla NativeScript and Angular. So you can go ahead and be assured of the quality of these plugins because they are marked with the stamp of being verified. So the NativeScript Marketplace is currently laid out like this. You can go ahead and search for plugins, and you can find the verified plugins right at the top. Click on a plugin like the verified Kinvey NativeScript SDK plugin, scroll through, and you can see all the interesting details that you're going to need to implement this plugin's functionality within your mobile app. I want to show you what's coming next for the marketplace because there's some pretty exciting things coming down the road. One is this new triage of verified and updated plugins. Another is the new author pages. So this will show you a little bit of information about the author behind the plugin, sort of like who's behind the scenes. And then we have this cool new feature of templates. So we are going to be offering some internally built and some community built templates on the NativeScript Marketplace. So I look forward to these enhancements, and keep an eye on market.nativescript.org. Now the last tool I want to talk about is NativeScript Sidekick. Now a lot of people have been using Sidekick already and have been really excited by its potential. It's one of these tools that is sort of magical and just helps you smooth out the rough edges that kind of plague the native developer. Now Sidekick is not a standalone IDE in and of itself, but it is a great companion as you're running your app using the CLI. So you can go ahead and use it to create a new app using templates that we offer. You can use it to manage an existing app. You can organize assets like the icons and all of the extra screens you need for delivery to the stores, manage your plugin integrations. You can build locally or in the cloud. Extremely useful if you happen to not have the emulators that you need installed locally. And then you can go ahead and scaffold new code and publish to stores. So let's take a look at how all of that works. Sidekick is a desktop application that you can download right off of nativescript.org/nativescript-sidekick. So go ahead and find the button that says download NS Sidekick and choose which platform you'd like to install it on. I already have mine installed, so I'm going to go ahead and fire it up. So here you're prompted to go ahead and create a new app or open an old app that you've already developed. So here I'm going to go ahead and give it a name, and then I'm offered a couple of menus. I'm offered several different ways that I can scaffold out my app. I can have it as a blank app, an app with a drawer, or tabs. I kind of like the tabs, so I'm probably going to stick with that. And then you're offered on the left the type of project that you want to have scaffolded for you. So NativeScript plus JavaScript, NativeScript plus TypeScript, or NativeScript plus Angular and TypeScript, which is what I'm going to go ahead and choose. So I'm going to create my app, and it's going to go ahead and scaffold it for me on my local computer, which is extremely helpful. So once your app is scaffolded out, you can take a look at a couple of options that are presented to you by Sidekick. The app settings on the left will show you how to manage your application version, version code, and you can take a look at the assets that you have available for your app. This is really helpful because you might have forgotten one of these icons or one of these screens that you need, and this will show you what's missing. I've found this very, very helpful. Also, this will give you an idea of the plugins that you have installed and the plugins that are available. And here we are back to the marketplace. You can search for the Fab button, for example, and go ahead and install that. I really like the way that this makes your workflow just that much simpler. It's sort of a one-stop shop for all the little bits and pieces that you need to make your app awesome. So here we have installed the floating action button, and we can also see the version so we can keep track of those sort of things as well. So that's just really great. Now another cool thing that you can do is scaffold bits and pieces from right within Sidekick. So this is really nice. If you need, for example, a login page to be added to your app, you can go ahead and it will scaffold you out the code. You can view the files and you can see that the login folder has been created right for you with the routing, the component, and all the modules and all the bits that an Angular app is going to ask for. So that is just a huge time saver. I love the kind of scaffolded code, so helpful. That's why everybody loves the Angular CLI, because of the scaffolding. So another cool thing that Sidekick helps you do is run your apps on device. So I've already fired up an Android emulator, and I'm going to click that I want a build type of a local build, and it's going to go ahead and build my app that I just scaffolded for this Android emulator. And the first time this does take a little bit of time, but it'll eventually start live syncing very nicely. So here we have that tabbed app that I have created, and you can see how nicely it looks on this Android emulator. Now if I would go ahead and do another build and run this on device with the debugger running, you are going to be able to leverage the Chrome dev tools that will pop right up. And this is an extremely helpful integration because it has this great debugging capability. Here comes the Chrome DevTools. And you can take a look at the Elements tab and see your app right in action. So I could make changes here just like you would on a web page actually, but you are actually working on a native app. It's actually pretty amazing. And on Android, I encourage you to give this a try. Now, one more super great thing that Sidekick helps you do is actually deliver your app to the App Store. This is just a miracle, in my opinion, because this is almost the worst thing in app development, is that final stretch from the completion of your app to delivery to the store, especially for iOS. So here, Sidekick offers you a nice menu to get your provisioning profiles and your certificates all loaded up and ready to roll. And you can do a local build, get it ready for delivery to Google Play, for example. Now, I've already posted in my key store, but I'm certainly not going to give you my password right now. So you'll have to take my word for it that this will help smooth your way right into the app stores. We've seen how Sidekick can help you create a completely new app from scratch and get everything organized within Sidekick for that app. But what if you already have been working on an app? Well, this was my situation. I started working on a Vue plus NativeScript app I call Clean Weather. It's based on a design that I found on Behance. So I decided to go ahead and import this into Sidekick and have it help me organize all the assets that I needed. So here's Clean Weather, and I went ahead and started adding bits and pieces that I need for iOS. For example, I'm going to need that the device families iPhone and iPad be saved. So I did that, and then I went ahead and took a look at the assets that I had. And Sidekick actually found that I was missing a couple of pieces. So obviously I still have some work to do to get my splash screens organized and to also handle some of these missing icons. So using Sidekick in tandem with an existing app that you've already been working on allows you to click on Terminal and go ahead and continue your usual development flow by firing up your emulator using the CLI and getting all of the debugging that you need right in your emulator here. So here I have Clean Weather loading up, and you can see that all of the bits and pieces for this screen are okay. It's actually a beautiful day in Boston. So then I would go ahead and start working on my within Visual Studio Code and go ahead and complete the app. So just to let you know that this is a Vue plus NativeScript app. The code is on GitHub, and in about 163 lines you can have a very nice looking weather app all set up for you. You can download NativeScript Sidekick right off of nativescript.org. Here's the URL, and I wish you the best of luck as you experiment with the new tooling that we're offering all for free for our beloved NativeScript community.
All right, thank you, Jen. Hopefully you'll all go out and download NativeScript Sidekick today and try it out. It's free. It's really a great way to bootstrap your app development and build amazing apps in the cloud. Again, no more need for a Mac if you're on Windows either. But some of you out there may be using our App Builder extension for Visual Studio and wondering where you fit in. Well, we have offered a free NativeScript extension for Visual Studio Code for a while now. But obviously VS Code is not the same as Visual Studio. What about those of us who are longtime Visual Studio users? Well, I'm pleased to have a chance to show off a pre-release version of our upcoming Sidekick extension for Visual Studio. Okay, let me pop over to Visual Studio here, and with the NativeScript Sidekick extension installed in Visual Studio 2017, I can go to File, New Project, and you'll see I'm presented with a list of NativeScript templates, and I can even narrow those templates down by project type, so Angular, JavaScript, or TypeScript. In my case, I'm just going to create, how about a drawer navigation project? And this prompt is just asking me to update to TypeScript 2.3. All right, with my project loaded inside Visual Studio, I can navigate to the app directory, and let's take a look in the home directory and pop open a couple files here. Those of you who are Visual Studio users will be comfortable with the IntelliSense options available and the code editing capabilities. Nothing I need to show off there, but I will go into my project menu here and take a look at my application properties. Now, this is where I'm able to set the app name, a description, the all-important app identifier as well. I can even manage my code signing certificates and provisioning profiles for both Android and iOS here. And I can pop over to the Dependencies tab, and I can look and see which plugins I have installed. I can upgrade them to new versions. This is a preview version of the extension, as I mentioned before, so I can search the NPM registry in this case, but in a future version that will actually search the plugins marketplace that we have. So I can discover and install new plugins right from within this interface. Now, more importantly, the best feature of the NativeScript Sidekick extension here is the ability to create cloud and local builds. So I have the ability to create cloud builds for both Android and iOS, as well as create local builds for Android if I have those local dependencies installed. So this truly does mean if I want to build for iOS, I don't need a Mac, I can do it in the cloud using this Sidekick extension. Now the next topic I'd like to tackle is the user experience. Few of us mobile app developers would consider ourselves designers, and even fewer of us have access to design resources. So we need tools and utilities to make the designs of our apps as simple and engaging as possible. So I'd like to spend a few minutes showing off what options are available for you today to improve your app's UI. The UI of your app. And the first topic here I want to cover are the new core themes that have actually been shipping with NativeScript since version 2.4. Now, these themes are available by default, and as you probably know by now, NativeScript apps are themed with CSS, and yes, this is the same CSS you've been using for years on the web. The themes themselves are actually written in Sass, and if you're not familiar with Sass, it's really just an extension of CSS, makes it easier to write and more maintainable over time. Now, the cool part of these themes is that they come with a variety of color schemes. So by default, we have a light and a dark scheme, and if we scroll down here, can pop open an image here that'll show us all the different color schemes that ship as part of our core themes. So some really nice color schemes that our designers have put together for us. Now let's take a look more closely at how these are used and what the results look like. And we're going to do that by using a kitchen sink demo app that's actually available as part of our public repository on GitHub here. So let me pop over to my terminal here, and I'm going to say tns run iOS, and concurrently tns run Android. And these will build and load the apps in my iOS simulator and Android emulator I have running. And while those are starting up, I'm going to head into my Visual Studio Code project here, so you can see an example of how these are used. Now, one thing you need to know is that the core themes rely on class selectors. So just importing the CSS into your app won't magically apply the styles. You do need to actually go into each individual element and specify the specific class you want to use. So as a simple example here, you can see we have a button element, and that has the BTN class applied to it. And that's all you need to do. Now the same syntax is going to apply to other elements. Oh, for example, let's take a look at our segmented bar. So our segmented bar here has a class of segmented-bar. Now remember, the core themes are based on class selectors, not element selectors, so you do need to apply these classes to all of your elements to get them to work. Now let's take a look at our simulators to see what's going on here. Let me bring that up. There's our iOS simulator and our Android one. I don't know what MTP host is. We can get rid of that warning. Alright, so here is our basic core theme. Let's take a look at our buttons on both the iOS simulator and the Android emulator. So you see a nice friendly looking theme applied here. And we can go through all of the UI elements, and again, these are all fully native. There's no magic going on here. Let's look at our switches. So fully native switches that are styled using the color themes that we've applied. Now, a cool thing about NativeScript is that, again, since everything's CSS based, it's actually very easy to switch between themes dynamically. So at the very bottom of our side drawer, we can actually pop open new themes. So let's apply a dark theme here. And so we can see what the dark theme looks like for those same elements. Very nice looking, very easy to implement inside of your app. Now, just so you know, to add these themes to your app, we can actually look at the docs here. It's a very simple CSS import statement to get these new themes. So they're all available in our docs here. So you do simple add import, NativeScript theme core, core light, and so on for all the different colors. Now, what if we want to build on and extend these apps? Now, while we can simply go into the CSS themes themselves and make some changes, it might be easier to do a different way, and that's why we came up with the NativeScript Theme Builder. This is a new site available at nativescriptthemebuilder.com that lets you try out different color schemes based on your selections for all the different UI elements. And what we've provided here are a variety of color palettes you can load up. So let's just take a look at, how about this reddish one here? You'll see everything gets loaded in all of our simulators. So we can see how those form elements, or rather those UI elements, will change. And now we can go into each individual element and change them by using our color pickers. So for example, if I want to change our button background color, make it a nice little orange there, we can do that, and it's reflected right here. I guess that was kind of a bad choice, huh? But like I said, you can go through and make changes to any UI widget you want, and those changes will be reflected in the simulator so you can see how they look on a device. Now you can also switch between iOS and an Android view, because there are tiny little differences between iOS and Android, of course, just to make sure it looks great on both platforms. Now when you're satisfied with what you've done, you can simply click here to download the theme, and we provide some basic instructions for you to download and use that theme in your app. And I'm going to go ahead and download it here. Alright, now with that file downloaded, I'm going to pop open Visual Studio Code here. I'm simply going to copy this custom CSS file, and I'm going to drop it into my theme app here. And let's put it in the demo styles directory. So there's my custom CSS file, and it should show up here. There it is. And I'm going to go into the app. I'm going to go into the app.css file, and I already have this in here. I'm going to uncomment this line. And what this is saying is that by default, we're using the Core Light theme, and I'm going to import the new custom CSS file to override some of the colors that are in the Core Light theme. So I'll hit save here and head back to our simulators so we can see. There we go. So using Live Sync, we can see the changes were made immediately in our app, and all the colors are there as we anticipated. And the cool thing for me is always to see these changes made directly in iOS and Android. Right? One set of code, both platforms. Works great, looks great. Alright, so the third leg of my UX trinity, if you will, is a traditional strength from our history as Telerik. If you are a .NET or JavaScript developer, you probably know of Telerik as a source for engaging widgets and controls. So we're extending this strength into NativeScript with our NativeScript UI offering. UI for NativeScript is maturing and already has a set of 7 widgets to help extend your app. First of all, the chart component here allows us to create dynamic, data-driven charts and graphs using the native capabilities of iOS and Android. And the list view component builds on the native list view options, allowing you to easily manage and style large lists of data. Side drawer gives you the ability to create drawers for either navigation purposes or for creating a nice little settings UI. And the calendar component is a great abstraction over the existing native calendaring UIs for iOS and Android. And the data form component here, this allows you to automatically scaffold forms on top of existing data structures. I have to say this is one I especially like. We also have a gauge component here, and an autocomplete text view which provides autocompletion and multiple item selection via a text interface. So right now I'd like to take the opportunity to demo one of these controls. Let's take a look at the list view in more detail. And I'm going to open my list view demo application here. And while we're looking at the code here, I'm going to just get these apps running. TNS run Android. All right, so while those are getting loaded up, let's take a quick look at the code here. And let's turn on word wrap so you can see everything. So very straightforward. The red list view, as it's known in code, allows us to populate a list view with items, which you can see here represented by the items property. We're applying a class to it just for some fancy little styling. And in this example, we're adding pull to refresh. So adding pull to refresh is a matter of setting this pull to refresh property, as well as specifying a JavaScript function to be executed when that pull to refresh initiated event is triggered. We're using a grid layout to put an image next to a stack layout of a couple different labels. So all very familiar basic NativeScript concepts. Now in our code behind here, you can see our page loaded function, which is executed when the page is loaded, obviously. We're pushing a variety of items to an array, and we're setting that items property right here. Now, remember that pull to refresh initiated function I mentioned? That's what gets executed right here. So when I do a pull to refresh, now we're faking this out with some test data here, obviously, but we're saying after 2 seconds, add another item to that array. So simple enough, right? Let's take a look at our simulators here. There we see it in our Android emulator as well. So here's our list view. We have an image here, and we have 2 label elements that are stacked on top of each other. And if I do a pull to refresh, and there's my item at the bottom. Pull to refresh right here. So fully native, works perfectly, cross-platform, same code. All right, so we've looked at NativeScript tooling and styling so far, but I'd like to get back to a message we talked about earlier. And this is the fact that we probably want to repurpose our web code in a native app, something that is frankly unthinkable with traditional native tooling. So I'd like to introduce you to Sebastian Vitalis, another one of our developer advocates here at Progress. Sebastian specializes in this concept of sharing code between web and native apps. All right, Sebastian, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Sebastian Vitalis and I'm a developer advocate at Progress. You can follow me on Twitter at Sebavita. So let's start with code sharing between web and mobile. The whole idea is that we want to be able to share as much of the code as possible between Android, iOS, and web. And one of the ways of doing that is we could use a monorepo type of project where we could have all the elements that are shareable, like pipes and services. You could even create a theme using Sass variables, but then have 2 separate CSS files, one for web styling and then one for NativeScript styling. And then for each of our components, the classes are pretty much shareable, but then we would have 2 different types of HTMLs, one for web and one for NativeScript. And then similarly for modules, we could reuse all the components, we could reuse the navigation, but we probably would have 2 different types of ng modules. And then having all that project, then we need some sort of a build process that will be able to take the shareable elements and then the platform specific. So for example, if we looked at the web project, we'd want to take the common ones, the red ones, and then as a result get a web application. Or vice versa, for NativeScript, we could then exclude the web specific ones, but use the NativeScript files and then get that going. So the pros and cons really are, the good part is that you could use Angular CLI. This approach is pretty good for complex projects, and everything is in one place. So it's actually quite easy to manage, between your web and your mobile application. The bad thing about this approach is that it's a bit of an overkill for small projects, and the fact that you need an additional build process, it kind of can be a little bit daunting at first, which is basically even the ugly part of like, how do I even begin, and where do I get a project that would have the build process out of the box. So the answer for that is there's a bunch of monorepo starter kits, or we call them project seeds. One from Team Maestro called Angular Native Seed, or the other one from Nathan Walker, which is called Advanced Angular Seed. So if you clone any of those will automatically come with the whole build process out of the box, and you could use that to build your own projects. So I'm going to focus today on the Team Maestro Seed. So the way it works, it has like its own build system. So if you want to build a web application, it's business as usual. You just call ng-serve, and then that calls Angular CLI, and you get a web project as a result. If you want to build a NativeScript application, then this specific monorepo has its own build process. So you run npm run iOS or npm run Android, and then this will execute in 2 steps. The first one is we will run through a gulp process, which will take the source code and then extract the shared items and as well the NativeScript specific one, and you will recreate a NativeScript type project. And then as a second step, this will run through a NativeScript CLI to build a mobile application for you. So for example, if you look at a component or how you would actually structure your code, let's say you would have a component, name component, which for the TypeScript class, it would be name.component.ts. But for the HTML, we use a naming convention. So you can see in blue, we actually have name.component.tns.html, which specify, hey, this is a native specific file. And in red, we have name.component.html without TNS, which basically means this is a web specific file. And if we wanted to add a SAS file, all we have to do is just follow the same concept. So again, in blue, we have .tns.scss to specify a NativeScript specific file, while in red, we have just .scss. And obviously, creating all these files can be time consuming. So you're probably wondering whether there's any tools that could help you with that. So the answer is yes. I created this little extension for NativeScript CLI, which is called NativeScript Angular CLI, and you can just install it by calling tns extension install NativeScript Angular CLI, and then as a result you get a bunch of additional commands. So one of them is tns generate shared component, which will generate a component in a structure that already has all the .tns files where you need them, or for short you could just use tnsgsc name. And then if you want to generate a shareable module, then you just call tns generate shared module name, and then again that will generate a module with a component inside that already has all the .tns web and both NativeScript specific files. So for the demo part, I'm just going to show you very quickly how to build a little imperial to metric converter, and then show you how all of that works in action. So here we've got a brand new Angular native seed project. So I'm going to just open terminal and use Angular CLI to generate a new service called calculator. And then once that's done, I can go into the calculator and then add additional functions like kilogram to pound and pound to kilogram that we will need. Additionally, we'll need a shareable module. So I'm going to use the TNS extension to generate shared module, and I'm going to call it calculator. So basically, I will be able to lazy load our module. So see this module sits in brand new folder here. So we have one module for web, one for NativeScript, and there is where our calculator component sits over here. So just over here, first thing we have to do is add our calculator service to the provider so that it will be accessible to us. That generated the code nicely for us, and then additionally do the same thing for the NativeScript ng module. So let's add it to providers. And then that's pretty much ready to go. And pretty much at this point, I could even build the application by just running ngserve, and then this will build a web application for us. And then to build a mobile application, I just have to go into the NativeScript folder, because that's basically where all the shareable elements will sit. And then I just need to run npm run iOS, and then this will basically perform the build for me, and then we'll be able to see exactly the same application between the two. So let's have a look at our web application. So let me just quickly refresh that. So we have our home and an about page, and our mobile app also has a home and an about page, pretty much displaying the same content. So we already are on a good way to do the code sharing. The thing is that the rebuilding of the NativeScript project this way, it can be time consuming every time. So even if it's like half a minute or a minute, you don't want to rerun the whole npm run command. So what we could do instead is just npm run live sync, which will basically do just the gold part of copying the shareable elements to the NativeScript folder. And then separately, I can go to the NativeScript folder and then just straight use tns run iOS, which will use NativeScript's live sync. And then by doing that, we can just make continuous changes to our project, and then constantly just have the whole app being refreshed for us. So let's try to implement some of the bits. So we have our calculator module and we want to display it. So we need to add it to the navigation. So in this project is actually the home routes that has all the navigation. So I can add a lazy loaded path to load calculator. And then this basically will go to the app calculator module. And in here, we want to load a calculator module in a lazy loaded fashion. And then also what we have to do is we need to add our calculator to the navigation bar. So I can just copy this quickly, which sits in app component.ts. So the title will be calculator page, and we want to navigate to calculator path. And then that pretty much should build the application for us. So let's have a look how this looks on our web application. So we have our calculator page with calculator title, and in our mobile application we have a new element just saying calculator title. So now all we have to do is just implement those. So let's go into the calculator component and then implement the necessary bits. So first I'm gonna go to the calculator component itself, and then we're gonna add a couple of attributes. So we have like an input for the user to enter the value, and the result where we're gonna display the value itself. I'm gonna use dependency injection to load our calculator service, which sits over here nicely. And then finally I'm gonna expose some of the functions. So like we have kilograms to pounds and pounds to kilograms. So pretty much like this is completely platform agnostic. So now we just have to implement the individual elements. So for native script, I'm just gonna add a stack layout with a text field to gather the input. Then we have a label to display the result, and a couple of buttons to just call kg to p or p to kg for us. And then for our web application, we basically have an input which binds to input itself. We use an h1 tag to display the result, and again a button that calls kg to p or p to kg. So if we now have a look at our application, we can see that if I enter 100 in pounds, that will be 220, or 100 pounds in kilograms, that's 45.45. And then in our native script application, I can again go to the calculator page, enter 100, convert it to kilograms or convert it to pounds, and we get pretty much the same results. I know this is a pretty simple example, but it pretty much explains the idea of like how this repo works, or how like the .tns extension kind of like allows us to separate web from native script files. So let me go back quickly to the presentation. So in terms of resources, if you want to learn more about it, I wrote quite a lengthy article on code sharing between web and mobile with Angular and NativeScript. You can check it out on our NativeScript blogs. I gave also a talk at NativeScript Dev Day on that very topic. If you're interested in using the Angular CLI for NativeScript, you can get it from that GitHub repo. Or if you want to see another example project, you can check me out at basically Seba Vita Pet Bros on my GitHub.
Awesome. Thanks, Sebastian. I hope you've all gotten at least one or two tidbits of information here today as we talk about this migration we are all undertaking from hybrid to native apps and NativeScript. So let's summarize where we're at. Why NativeScript? Well, you get to use your web skills to create truly native apps with full App Store compatibility. You get to leverage robust tooling from Progress, not to mention free. With NativeScript, you get day zero support for the latest APIs from iOS and Android. And with the backing of Progress, not only do you have a proven corporate open source sponsor, but you also have the option of our legendary support. And yes, apps created with NativeScript are cross-platform, one codebase by default. And again, the framework and CLI are free, open source, and licensed with the business-friendly Apache 2 license. And here is your elevator pitch. NativeScript is an open source framework for building truly native mobile apps with JavaScript. You're using your web skills like Angular and CSS, and you're getting native UI and performance on both iOS and Android. So thank you all for coming. Have a fantastic day.